So if you've got your Bibles, let's go ahead and get them out. Let's get them out to Daniel 7. We're really at a kind of like a major hinge point in the book of Daniel. We've talked about for the last couple weeks how Daniel 1 through 6 really proceed like a story. Daniel's been telling us about what God is doing in a story form, reads very much like a novel. In these last 5 chapters, God's going to show us what he's doing. He's going to show us things that he's been revealing to Daniel over the course of his tenure under the kings of Babylon, the kings of Media, the kings of Persia. So what we're doing basically in the middle of the book is we're actually kind of going back toward the middle of his time as just one of the real primary leaders in the court of Babylon to zoom in on some of the visions that God gave him. We're having a real strategic shift in the way that Daniel communicates to us, the way that God communicates to Daniel. The tactics change, and so we have to make some adjustments in the way we read. You don't read a newspaper the way that you read a love letter, do you? You don't read the comics the way that you read a Post-it note, do you? You come with different expectations. You come with a different lens. You come looking for different things, queuing in on different things. You come with different expectations. So we're edging into this part of Daniel that's called apocalyptic literature. And apocalyptic sounds scary, doesn't it? Apocalyptic is scary. It's meant to be. It's meant to wake you up. Apocalyptic imagery is crisis literature. It's not written for you to read by the fireside while you're cozying up to get ready to bed. You've got your hot coffee or your hot toddy or whatever, and you're just going to edge off into sleep. This is crisis literature. The world is coming to an end. The world is on fire. The world is about ready to come undone. That's what apocalyptic literature. The tone changes. The scenes change. The audience changes. What we've seen from Daniel 1 through 6 is God has a message for the king, and he uses Daniel to interpret it. But in Daniel 7 through 12, God's got a message for Daniel. And you know what happens? Daniel needs an interpreter. He's so beside himself with what he's seen in the visions, he needs an interpreter. Often a heavenly interpreter. Will somebody please show me what this vision means? So God had a word for the king in Daniel 1 through 6. God had a word for Daniel in 7 through 12, which means he had a word for Israel, which means he has a word for us. So this is a word, an apocalyptic word, an urgent word for us, as it was for Daniel 2,600 years ago. A couple of you have told me that your doctors have prescribed a fast from watching the news or reading the newspaper for the last 4 weeks. Can't imagine why. Might have something to do with your blood pressure. Do you ever feel like the world is just on fire? I mean, whether it's the newspaper or the news or YouTube, Facebook, you're like, could anything else possibly be in chaos right now? You know, it's like the virus, all of the marching, all of the protesting, all of the fighting, all of the politics, what the governor is doing, what the governor isn't doing, what the president is doing, what the president is doing, what China is doing, what China isn't doing, what Russia is doing in the midst of what China is or isn't doing. I mean, it's just like, and so there's probably, to some extent, a good reason why your doctor said, can you just unplug that for a couple weeks? Do you ever feel like there's forces at work, that there are things being churned up on like a cosmic scale, and you go, there's nothing I can do about this? Like, we're out here because of things that have been churned up on the other side of the globe that we had no control over, and we still have very little control over. I mean, it has this feeling of helplessness at times, doesn't it? Like, I'm kind of at the whim of the powers that be. If you felt like that, you're in good company with Daniel. Daniel felt like that, and Israel, God's people, felt like that. That's what apocalyptic literature does. It speaks into that. The world is on fire. There are things that are being churned up that I cannot control, and yet I feel very much at the whim of And I need a word to get my feet back on the ground. I don't need a story. I need an apocalypse. I need something to wake me up and grab me by the scruff of the neck and say, stay faithful. The world is on fire, and God is in control. And so what we're going to see in Daniel is this apocalyptic literature, not telling us a story, but showing us a vision, showing us pictures. It's like I don't know how many of you are art buffs, but the way apocalyptic literature works is it's like an impressionistic painting, where an artist comes to a canvas, and they've got their oil palette, and they take big globs of it, and they make this painting, they make this painting with big, broad brushstrokes, and they're just slapping stuff on there all together, and you can't really see how it all fits. In fact, if you get too close to it, all you see is red and blue and green. You have to step back from it to see the impression, the big picture. If you get too close, you can't see what the picture's all about. Apocalyptic literature needs to be read like that. If you get too close to it, if you press the details too far, you don't appreciate the impression that the author is trying to make on you. Another way to describe it would be it's like a play, and there are scenes. Today our play has 3 scenes, verses 1 through 9, 10 through 14, and 15 through 28. There are 3 separate scenes of an impressionistic painting, and they're all going to make a distinct impression on us. So what I want to do, unlike the last couple of weeks where we've read the whole chapter at one go, I feel like that would be a bit much, because this is an apocalypse. And what I want to do is read one scene at a time, kind of camp out on it for just a bit, and then move to the next one so we can step back from the painting and figure out what in the world does this mean. So let's try not to get lost in the details. Let's just read the play. Let's look at the painting and look at the big picture. Notice what Daniel 7 says. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions of his head as he lay in his bed. Then he wrote down the dream and told the sum of the matter. Daniel declared, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and 4 great beasts came out of the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Then I looked, and its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and the mind of a man was given to it. Behold, another beast, a second one, like a bear. It was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth, between its teeth, and it was told, Arise, devour much flesh. After this I looked, and behold, another like a leopard, with 4 wings of a bird on its back. And the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. And after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, terrifying, dreadful, exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke into pieces, and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that was before. It had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up from among them another horn, a little one, which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by its roots. And behold, in the horn were eyes, the eyes like a man, and it had a mouth, speaking great things. Let's just pause right there. These beasts are grotesque, right? They're ugly. They're not normal beasts. They're apocalyptic beasts. They take kind of the scariest parts of some of the animals in our created world and kind of combines them and mashes together. These are mutant creatures that most scholars, most commentators see as symbols that are reflecting, they're looking toward the very same kingdoms that Daniel prophesied or had a vision of in Daniel 2. Remember the statue with the 4 different materials, the gold, the iron, the clay, and so forth. Most scholars see that these apocalyptic images, these beasts, are symbolizing the next 4 great powers, or the 4 great powers that are within Daniel's time frame: Babylon, the Medes and the Persians, Greece, and Rome. These beasts are meant to be symbols. And the thing with apocalyptic literature and symbolism is it has the ability of being very timely. It can speak to a time, a place, a real context of real kingdoms, but then can be flexible enough to say, these beasts and these kingdoms don't necessarily need to just be seen as these four successive world powers. They can be seen to be world powers in any time or any place that depict these characteristics that are signifying or symbolizing what these beasts symbolize. So they're very timely. They speak to Daniel's day, and that they speak to any day, our day, any time that we're alive and trying to figure out what in the world is going on in the midst of walking with Christ and living out history. So if that's the case, what Daniel's really seeing is that the world and its history is a beast, and it's chaos. One of the images that might be at a loss to us is, notice where these beasts emerge from. Where does it say the beasts emerge from? It says they emerge from the sea. In the ancient world, in the ancient Near Eastern mind, the sea was not like it is to us, where we go to the coast and we go there to retire or take the weekend and sit with a drink on the beach and just kick our feet back. It's a place of relaxation and rest. Not for the ancient Near Eastern mind. For the ancient Near Eastern mind, the sea was the place of chaos. The sea was a place that God had to have his Spirit go over to bring into order as he spoke his creation of order and existence into being. The sea was the place of chaos and tumult, where the wild beasts, the Leviathan and Job and other wild creatures made their abode. The sea was a place of terror. It was a place that God used to destroy the world, right, with the flood. So the sea, in an ancient Near Eastern mind, is a place not of respite and rest. The sea is an image of chaos and destruction. And these four beasts, depending on which kingdom they are looking at, when we step back and look at these beasts that emerge, and they're terrifying and they're mutant and they're horrific, we could certainly see how they fulfill Babylon, the Medes and the Persians, Greece and Rome. God wants Daniel to see, and he wants you and I to see, that the kingdoms of our world are beasts, and they stir up chaos. If you're looking to the kingdoms of our world to bring peace, if you're looking to the kingdoms of our world to really come together and make things right, you're going to be in for a shock. You're going to be in for a surprise. Because Daniel 7 says, the kingdoms of the world unleash chaos as they're grappling and wrestling for power and squashing one another to claim their throne and to extend their kingdom. They unleash chaos. They come out of chaos and they unleash it into the world. Thankfully, the next scene shows us that though the history of the world is absolute and utter chaos, God is in control. Notice how the Lord depicts it to Daniel. It says, as I looked, thrones were placed. What's a throne? Who sits on a throne? What's it a symbol of? Power. Thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames. Its wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire issued and came out from before him. 1,000 thousands served him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. And the court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. I looked, and because of the sound of the great words the horn was speaking, and as I looked, the beast was killed, and its body was destroyed, and given over to be burned with fire. And the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. So not only does God want to show Daniel and us that history is a beast, and history and all of its world powers, whether it's the four major powers leading up to Jesus' day, or it's the innumerable world powers from Jesus' day till now and moving forward, history is a beast and it's unleashing chaos. And verse 9 says, and yet, God is in control. We move from the chaotic sea where the beasts emerge to a picture of heaven, not necessarily as a place, but as a dominion where God sets up and takes his throne. God is imaged as not just an old guy. Remember, we're told we can't use that word. He's viewed as one who's always been, the Ancient of Days, which means he was here long before these beasts were. He was here long before they emerged from the sea. He takes his throne, and he's wise, and he's pure. The colors like white symbolize purity and power. He is just and righteous. Notice how many references there are to fire. God's just and righteous fire emerges from his throne. This is a throne of power and absolute justice. Notice that this throne and this power isn't just monopolized by the Ancient of Days. Notice what it says that this all-powerful Ancient of Days does with his dominion and his kingdom. Notice what it says in verse 13. I continued to see in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man. And he came to the Ancient of Days, was presented before him, and to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away. His kingdom shall never be, his kingdom is one that shall never be destroyed. We see one like a son of man, different from these mutant creatures that are wrecking chaos in the world. One like a son of man, not coming down, but going up on the clouds of heaven, up to the throne, to have God's power from the Ancient of Days shared with this one who is all-powerful. Whenever you see cloud imagery in the Old Testament, and there's a lot of places, where are some places in the Old Testament where the clouds show up? Yeah, Exodus is a big one. When God comes down on the mountain, what do we see? It's enveloped in clouds. When God is leading his people through the wilderness, there's a cloud that shows up. Clouds are really not only to record the historical event of God, it's a symbol in this chapter to show wherever there's a cloud, that's where God is. This person is riding on the winds of heaven, on the clouds of heaven. The Psalms talk about how God alone rides in the chariot in the heaven, the cloud chariot in the heavens. This is a figure that's not only royal, receiving power, this is a figure that's divine. He's riding the cloud chariot to the throne. And the Ancient of Days doesn't monopolize his power. He delegates it, and he shares it with this one who is like a son of man. Unlike the creatures that are stirring up chaos, Daniel 9 through 14 says, God overcomes the chaos. He overcomes the chaos. And he does it by delegating and sharing his authority with one like a son of man. How in the world does he do this? When does this happen? It says that he's taking his throne to pronounce his judgment, and he's crowning his own king. It says that this person's a king, and he delegates his authority. God himself crowns his own king to rule the world. We have to ask the question, when does this happen? Who is this figure that rides on the clouds to receive power and glory from the almighty Ancient of Days? Never had a beginning, never had an end. This is where you say the Bible answer. Jesus, right? This is one of the most controversial passages in Jesus' ministry. Many times throughout his ministry, Jesus refers to himself as the Son of Man. And that's not just a human title, like I'm just the Son of Man, like I'm human just like you. Behind that is Daniel 7, when Jesus says, I, the Son of Man, have come. It's a direct allusion to this chapter, Daniel chapter 7. He's saying, I am the one who is coming with the clouds of heaven to receive power from God Most High. I am the one through whom God will execute his judgment. I am the king who God will crown to rule the world. What does Jesus say in Matthew 28? Before he ascends, what does he say? You know it. All authority in heaven and earth has been given. Daniel 7 says, dominion and power have been given to him. When he's brought in before the high priest in Mark 14, and there's all this cross testimony, none of it's lining up about who Jesus is, what he said. The Jewish high council is trying to, really try to entrap Jesus and get a real clear, clean reason to get rid of him. None of the evidence is lining up. And Jesus remains silent until this issue comes up. He doesn't say a word until the high priest presses him about his identity, presses him about who he is and why he's come. Listen to Mark 14, verse 60 and following. The high priest stood up in the midst and asked Jesus, "Have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you?" But he remained silent and made no answer. Again the high priest asked him, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Most Blessed?" Listen, here it is. Jesus said, "I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven." Not coming down, going up. Going up to receive the kingdom. Going up to receive the power. Going up to be crowned as God's king, to rule over these beasts that are wrecking God's good world and unleashing chaos in every which way. Jesus says, Daniel 7 is me. It's me. I am the king that God crowns. I am the one through whom he executes his judgment. The high priest tore his garments and said, "What further witness do we need? You've heard the blasphemy. Blasphemy! This isn't just, you're the king. He's saying, you're the royal king. You're the one who alone rides the chariot clouds. You're the one alone who stands before the throne and rightfully receives the power and the majesty and the kingdom that never ends. You've heard the blasphemy. What is your decision?" And they all condemned him as deserving death. Nobody can say that. Some began to spit on him and cover his face and strike him, saying to him, "Prophesy." And the guards received him with blows. They just beat on him. Do you hear the tension here? Do you hear the ultimate irony? The ultimate irony when we have Daniel 7 square in the crosshairs with Mark 14. The royal guards and Jesus' own people are condemning to death the one who God is making king. They're condemning to death the one who will be given royal and rightful power. And it's all going according to plan. Right? It's not like this is a mistake or this wasn't supposed to happen. It's all going according to plan, but the tension is palpable. The irony is palpable. Here's the one who will be given all authority in heaven and on earth. He's going to be crucified very soon after this condemnation. He's going to be buried in the ground, and he's going to be raised back to life that early Sunday Easter morning. He's going to rally his disciples and meet with them and show, because they know this doesn't happen. People don't get crucified and come back to life. So he has to prove, as it were, that this really did happen and this really is true. And then he gathers them on the mountain of all places, the same place, as it were, the same geographical point where God would come down to give his laws, the same place Jesus would go before he says, "Go and make disciples of all the nations. Teach them to obey everything that I've commanded. Baptize them and teach them to obey everything I've commanded you. I'm with you always, even to the end of the age." And then he does what? He goes to his throne. When does Daniel 7 happen? It happens in Jesus' death, burial, resurrection, and his ascension to receive his kingdom. God puts down the chaos. God overcomes the chaos that the kingdoms of our world are unleashing. He does it by pronouncing his judgment through Jesus on the cross. He does it by pronouncing his judgment with Jesus' resurrection and ascension to his throne. He does it by crowning his own king to rule forever. And I know many of you getting antsy. You got your fingers ready. Let's get our communion out. Let's get that top layer ready. What we're remembering with this bread and this juice is something Daniel didn't have the perspective or the privilege. This vision troubled him. Who is this Son of Man? What does this mean? I needed interpretation. And here we stand 2,600 years ago to say, we know who the Son of Man is. We know the one that God crowns as his king to overcome the chaos that our world's kingdoms are unleashing. So would you join me and take the bread to remember the body that was broken, the body that took the blows from the Roman soldiers who would be the rightful heir of God's kingdom. Let's take the bread together. And then when you've got your juice ready, let's remember, let's praise God together for the fact that this one like a son of man who would ride the cloud chariot to receive God's kingdom, to rule forever, came at an ultimate cost. An ultimate cost. It would cost him his life. Let's drink the juice together to remember the body that was broken and the blood that was shed to rescue us. I don't know about you, but Daniel 7 gives me goosebumps sometimes because there's so much power here. There's so much God overcoming evil and doing it in the most surprising way through Jesus. To have Jesus look the high priest in the eye and say, "You will see the Son of Man. You will see the fulfillment of this prophecy. Even though you're going to put me to death, I'm going to come back to life. I'm going to ascend to take my throne in heaven. You are going to see that." It's a real gift and a pleasure to us, isn't it? To be able to look at that and put these pieces together. It says that Daniel is practically undone. Daniel, in the first part of the book of Daniel, he comes in quite cool. The king's received a vision. He comes in to interpret it. It says in verse 15, "As for me, my spirit was anxious, and the visions of my head alarmed me. I approached one of those who stood there and asked him the truth concerning all of this. And he told me, and he made known to me the interpretation of these things. These four great beasts are four kings." So, do you hear that? The text itself is saying these are symbols. Don't be looking for these literal mutant beasts out there. These are symbols. These are apocalyptic pictures. They symbolize four great kings who will arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, forever, and ever. The kings of the earth unleash chaos, and they wreck the world. And God yet overcomes the chaos through his judgment and by crowning his king. But there's still something that needs to be resolved in this scene. What about you and I? What's our part to play in this? Where do you and I fit? Where do all the saints of old, from Israel on through the church, where do we fit in the midst of this? This last scene in this first act of the apocalypse that Daniel has show us our place. And it's a bit of a sticky one, to be honest. It's a bit of a sticky place that we find ourselves. Notice what it says. "I desired to know the truth about the fourth beast, which was different from all the rest, exceedingly terrifying, with its teeth of iron, claws of bronze, which devoured and broke into pieces, stamped what was left with its feet. And about the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn that came up and became, which 3 of them fell, the horn that had eyes and a mouth that spoke great things, and that seemed greater than its companions. And I looked, this horn made war with the saints, and prevailed over them, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given for the saints of the Most High. The time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. Thus he said, as for the fourth beast, there shall be a fourth kingdom on the earth, which shall be different from all the kingdoms. It will devour the whole earth, trample it down, break it to pieces." In other words, there's coming a kingdom that makes the Medes and the Persians look soft. There's coming a kingdom that will exercise power and dominion and ruthlessness in all over the globe, in all of its power. "The 10 horns out of this kingdom, 10 kings will arise, and another shall arise from them. He'll be different from the former ones, and will put down 3 kings. He'll speak words against the Most High, wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change the times and the law. They shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. But the court shall sit in judgment, and his dominion shall be taken away, to be consumed and destroyed to the end. And the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. His kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. Here is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts greatly alarmed me. My color changed, but I kept the matter in my heart." Many, not all, but many, and I hesitate to say most, but many see this fourth kingdom. This fourth kingdom's got Daniel's attention. This seems different. In fact, the word different is used, I forgot how many times, but I circled it a lot when I was studying, like 5 times. This beast is different. This is unlike any other beast. Most scholars see the fourth kingdom as Rome. Rome in all of her power controlled more of the world than any other kingdom that had come. That the 10 horns in the Psalms and in apocalyptic literature are usually a symbol of power, a symbol of kingship. That it has to reference 10 leaders and 3 more, and then one ultimate figure arising out of them with eyes that depict sovereignty and a mouth that boasts of great things, speaks great things of himself, which Rome and all of the Caesars did, spoke great things about themselves and their kingdom, and, quite frankly, wore out the saints, persecuted the saints, at times in pockets and at other times full-blown throughout the kingdom, depending on which Caesar was ruling at the time. So not all, but many see that this fourth kingdom is the kingdom of Rome. Again, the imagery is meant for us to not be looking to pinpoint everything. The imagery is meant for us to look that it may have an immediate fulfillment in the times that come for those who are receiving this book, but it's flexible enough for us to be able to see that this imagery can be for any kingdom throughout the world that exercises this kinds of power and speaks great things of itself and systematically persecutes God's people. So it can do both. It can have a direct, absolute fulfillment, and it can be flexible enough to say, this isn't the only kingdom that's coming that will exercise this kind of power. This isn't the only kingdom that will come that will speak great things of itself and will go to great lengths to persecute God's people. What's our role to play in this? The role that we have to play in this is we take the brunt end of the chaos for a while. Did you hear it in the text? Multiple times it says that this kingdom will trample on and stomp out and wear out the saints. That to some degree, wherever we are, we're going to take the brunt end of the chaos that this fourth kingdom, or any kingdom, unleashes. That it's not a chaos that's being unleashed in general out into the world, that as God's people, these kings are aligning themselves against him. They're aligning themselves against his king that he's crowned. They're speaking ultimate things about themselves and speaking against God and his king and his kingdom. This last scene essentially sobers us up and says, be ready for the fact that this chaos isn't going to be unleashed in general out there, that to some degree and to a large degree, depending on the time and the season, we're going to take the brunt end of the chaos. Why? Because we're aligned with the king. Our allegiance is with the king that's been crowned. The war has been set. The reason we're caught up in the midst of the battle is because the battle's between them and him. Amen. And we are aligned with the king that's been crowned. So, for a while, and for a time, we're going to take the brunt end of the chaos. It's going to be aimed specifically at you and me. And to us in the West, that always comes as such a surprise. Like something's wrong. Like, how can this be? This can't be happening. Whereas if you talk to Christians in China or in the Middle East, this imagery resonates. This imagery goes, yeah, we follow the king, and the kings are against the king, and we're in trouble because we stand with him. So to some degree, sometimes to a large degree, until the kingdom is set up finally and in an everlasting way, we are going to receive the brunt end of the chaos. But did you hear the other thread? Because there's tension. That we're going to receive the brunt end of the chaos for a time. But did you notice how it said over and over and over again that, I'll just read the last verse, the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. His kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom. Whoever said anything about us receiving anything? Remember what verses 9 through 14 said? It said he would receive the kingdom. It said he was riding on the cloud chariot to receive the kingdom, to be crowned king over all. Nobody said anything about us receiving anything. But that's where this scene comes in. This scene says, if you're aligned with the king, if you have shown your allegiance to the king who rides the cloud chariot, like Jesus did after his death, burial, resurrection, ascension, to receive power and dominion and authority forever. If you're aligned with him, he shares his authority with you. He shares his everlasting dominion and kingdom with you. He gives us gifts that none of us could ever deserve. And one day, those gifts will be given to you and I to last firmly and finally forever. So on the one hand, right now, we're going to take the brunt end of the chaos. But with the hope that one day we'll share in the kingdom of the King that God crowns when he puts chaos to an end. Gathering in worship right now just drives that stake deep into our heart and says, stay with him. Be faithful to the King. There's a certain sort of endurance that I think that comes with this message. I'm troubled by this, but I'm encouraged by it at the same time, to the sense that, think about being Daniel. Here's Daniel. It's maybe another 500 years until Christ comes. And he's given a word that says, when the exile's over and Cyrus sends you back to the promised land, the kingdom hasn't been set up yet. Chaos is still going to be unleashed. The Persians, the Medes, the Ptolemies, the Seleucids, Greece, Rome, it's going to be an absolute mess. So don't think that when the exile's over, everything's fine. It's going to still be a mess. History is still going to unleash chaos, and you are going to still be battered around under these incredibly powerful beasts of kings and kingdoms. There's not going to be another 500 years until this king comes riding his cloud chariot to take his throne. To me, if I'm Daniel, I'm going, 500 years? I need help now. I hear a lot of people saying, it sure seems like, we're right at it. I mean, it's got to be. Jesus' second coming has got to be. And it may be, right? The point of not knowing is it keeps you on your toes, doesn't it? Because if you knew, you could kick up your feet. But what if it didn't happen for another 500 years? Would you still be faithful? Would you still say, being faithful matters? And I'm not looking to the kingdoms of this world to bring peace. Daniel 7 says they're going to unleash chaos. And to some extent, I'm going to receive the brunt of it. And if the kingdom doesn't come for another 500 years, I still want to be aligned with the King. Because I know that his kingdom lasts forever, and if I stay with him, he'll share it with me. It drives that stake deep in your heart to stay faithful. Let's pray. I marvel, God, at the way that your word speaks to us. At all times and in all places. Thank you so much, God, for the privilege of being able to look at this vision that, made Daniel sick. It made his color change, and it made him incredibly uneasy because he didn't know what it meant. He couldn't put the pieces together. And then we see and we hear Jesus' words about being the Son of Man and receiving your kingdom, and that you overcome the chaos through the King that you crown. God, it is sobering to us to realize that the King is on his throne, and yet until that kingdom is fully appreciated, fully realized, fully established, we're going to receive the brunt end of the chaos. I pray, God, that rather than being surprised by that, we would just be ready for it. Help Daniel 7, Lord, make us ready for it. Knowing that the flip side is we're going to receive a kingdom that will never wear out and never last because we're aligned with you. The kings of the earth are unleashing chaos. But God's overcome the chaos. He's pronounced his judgment, and he's crowned his king, ultimately in Jesus. Stay faithful to him. He's returning just in the way that he left, as the angel said to the disciples when they looked up at the sky. And the angel said, "Why are you looking up at the sky?" As if you and I wouldn't be like, okay, that doesn't happen every day. He's returning in the same way that he came, to bring in his kingdom that will one day overcome chaos once and for all. Stay faithful to him this week. Have a great week. God bless you. See you.